Let's paint Heliconia Rostrata, also known as Hanging Lobster Claw. Hi, I am Run. Welcome to Run My Art. Hello everyone. So Heliconia is a tropical flowering plant which is famous for its petals or pods that resembles lobster claw. And this particular species is known as Hanging Lobster Claw with its scientific name Heliconia Rostrata. And this is how the young plant looks like, and as it grows the petals starts cascading downwards. And I'm going to demonstrate this painting on Canson cold press watercolor paper, 300 grams per square meter of thickness, and it's going to be half of A4 size, which is equivalent to A5, and it's going to be of portrait orientation. And just a quick mention of my recent tutorials of painting this cactus and bird of paradise. If you have missed them, I have left the link to these videos in the description. So do consider checking them out. So just sharing the process of sketching this lobster claw plant. It's not a very complicated or very detailed sketch. Just showing how I kick-started by drawing the stem that holds the pods or the petals in the middle. And after that, I just drew a sample petal or the pod on the left hand side of the stem. And using this petal sketch as a guidance, I just drew a parallel line which imitates the same shape of the middle stem on both sides. So this will ensure that each petal that I draw further would be of the same size and creates a balanced look, even though the shape may not be exactly symmetrical. So done with the opened petals, now for the bottom petals, which is an unopened petal or bud. And I'm going to kickstart this painting using my Casa Neo mop brush from Da Vinci size 2, and the main colors that I'm using is Prussian blue from the Academy series, while the lemon yellow and carmine are from Horadam series. So I've used the Prussian blue to paint the middle stem, as it looks much darker in the reference photo, and I also believe it acts as underpainting. Next, I am using the lemon yellow to paint the main petals, and I am using wet on dry technique. So meaning I am using the wet consistency of paint and painting it on the dry surface of the paper. And the reason why I started painting them with yellow is because this acts as an underpainting as well. If you would have noticed in my previous tutorials, I always use a brighter color before I start painting the main color, which is red in this particular painting. And while the painting subject is in the drying process, I am quickly pre-wetting the empty areas of the paper to start painting the background. And the first color that I'm dropping while this paper surface is wet is carmine, permanent carmine, and I'm just trying to make impressions of other lobster plant in the background. So basically this is a wet on wet painting and often used to paint very soft looking or wash out background. So once again I am using the same wet on wet technique for the left hand side of the empty areas or background painting. And the color that I'm using is permanent green, and painting in some impression of leaves or stalks at the back. And if you notice the paper is drying off, you can just re-wet them with clean water. Just make sure that your brush is not overly soaked with water when you re-wet the dry surface. Once the entire painting is dry, I am going to make the second layer of paint, starting off with the stem. And I'm using my rigger brush to pre-wet the stem with a little bit of water, just to try some wet on wet technique. And quickly I am dropping in the carmine color using my mop brush that I used earlier. Next, I am once again using the wet on wet approach to paint one of these petal, just as a demo. After pre-wetting the surface, I am now quickly dropping in a nice mix of the same carmine red using my mop brush. And since it's a wet on wet technique, you can notice the color bleeding in very quickly or profusely. And I had to lift out some colors using my rigger brush to reveal the yellow part of the petal. Next, I am going to use the wet on dry approach to paint the petal. So I haven't pre-wet the petal area, and I just kick-started painting it with the carmine. And next I am using a damp brush to just soften the edge of the red paint while I maintain the yellow border at the bottom of the petal. So judging from the painting process and the size of the painting itself, I realized that the wet on dry technique is more suitable. Therefore, I am continuing to paint the rest of the petals using the wet on dry. However, if you prefer to use the wet on wet technique, go ahead. I just felt that the painting size is too small for me to use the wet on wet technique, where I might be having control issues with my brush. So moving on to the third layer painting, where I am going to darken the petal pods by using a darker shade of carmine. So I have added a small hint of sapphire into the carmine and arrive at a maroon color mix or burgundy, and this is the color that I'm going to use to darken the entire plant. And starting off by painting the stem towards the petal pods, and I am not painting the entire petal pod. Instead, I am just focusing on painting the top part of the pod and leaving some space at the bottom, where I am going to use the clean damp brush to glaze over, similar to the second layer painting that I did. And now, as I mentioned, I'm using a clean damp brush to glaze at the bottom of the painting to give it a soft wash. Done with the maroon mix, now I am using a little bit of Indian yellow mixed with the earlier lemon yellow and painting the bottom part, which is the border of the flower petal. And since I noticed there's a hint of green in the border of the petals, I have mixed the Prussian blue that I used earlier with the lemon yellow to arrive at a very bright looking green. And carefully I am painting that into the border using a smaller brush, which is my script brush size 1, since it's a very narrow area. Now it's time to paint the background since it looks much lighter. So I've made a mixture of permanent green and a sapphire blue with some touches of sapphire as well to arrive at a very dark petrol blue mix. The idea is to get a very dark looking background and adding a vibe of tropical forest. So you can experiment using any color of your choice, but preferably something that can create an impression of a tropical forest look. And not to forget, I am using the wet on dry technique in order to paint this part of the background, simply because it is actually the corners of the subject of my painting. So I do not want to risk using a wet on wet technique where I could accidentally wet the petals of the flower and stain it with these dark colors. So I would say it would be better to use a wet on dry technique. So basically I am just painting a small portion or part of the empty areas, and then I am using a clean damp brush, make those soft washes and creating a soft look at the edges, similar to the petal painting. And since the corners of the paper is away from the subject matter, I have used the wet on wet technique where I am comfortable pre-wetting the surface and dropping in the colors, similar to the first method that I used earlier in this video. So this is just a repetition of the earlier process whereby I just used the wet on dry technique for those areas that are closer to the subject of the painting, followed by a wet on wet technique for those that are further away or at the corners of the painting. I'm just making some color variations here and there and creating some impressions of stalks or leaves in the background. As I said, I'm trying my best to keep to the tropical forest theme. A little bit of clean water spray to create some special effects. And here it is, a close-up of those water droplets that hit the wet painting when I use the water spray, and it creates a cool effect. You can try that on your painting as well. Moving on, I felt that the flower petals or pods needs a little bit more touch up, and once again I am using the maroon mix to paint lightly on the corners of the petals as well as the stem. And once done with this, as you already know, I am going to use a clean damp brush to give it soft washes. Just a touch up on some part of the background where I noticed there are white or bright areas to be filled in with some paint. A little bit of splatter. Since this is a watercolor painting, it is never complete without some paint splatters. So I'm just painting the tip of the stem with a dark green shade. Alright, time for some finishing touches using white gouache, also from Schminker. I am going to use this white paint mix to paint all those highlight areas on the petal pods. I am using my script brush since these are going to be fine lines. But if you have shaky hands or find it difficult to control a very narrow area of painting, then I would suggest you to use a pastel pencil or a watercolor pencil as well that has got a white shade, and just draw them onto the areas that you want to create these highlights. Apart from the highlights, you can also attempt to paint some textures or patterns on the petals. Finally, a little bit of sapphire on the tip of the petals. finally we have come to the end of this tutorial. So if you find this tutorial helpful and also have become a fan of my work, then don't forget to like, share and subscribe to my channel, and also hit the bell icon for the latest updates from my channel. See you all again on another exciting tutorial. Bye.